Hey, I'm Dean Legge from Dog Post, making you a smarter Georgia fan. What are the top 5 games of this season coming up? We've got that for you right now. Take a listen, and at the end of this video, I'll tell you which game will be the turning point for the Dogs this season. It's the opening game of the season, Georgia's number 5 biggest game of the year against the Virginia Cavaliers, who should come in ranked in this one, Matt.
Yes. Always you need to start it off big. It's in Atlanta, Chick-fil-A Bowl. Everyone's going to be watching. Big game to start the season. It's not Arkansas State or Louisiana Monroe. It is a Virginia team who's coming off a really, really nice season. Got to get the season going on a good note. So it is important. They might be ranked. We'll see. But there's a lot of big games in this 2020 schedule, and Virginia is a really big game, and it's important they go off to a good start.
I don't know if it's one of the top 5 teams they'll play all year, but I think it's one of the top 5 biggest games just because, like you said, it is one of the first game of the year, and it's in Atlanta. It's in a great environment there in Mercedes-Benz. So in that sense, it is important to get the season started off well.
The other biggest thing to consider here is this is going to be the only game on television. This is a Monday night game on Labor Day. Georgia will have a short week going into their next game against someone I can't recall who it is, but you know, Virginia is a big game. After that comes number 4, which is
South Carolina.
So this game is a big game. It's a big game. It's not a rivalry. Tech is a rivalry, not a big game. That's why they're not in our top 5. But in this case, one reason we kind of went back and forth on this one, didn't we, Matt?
Yeah, we didn't know if Tennessee should go there or even Georgia Tech, but coming off that embarrassing loss at home, South Carolina, to them, this is a rivalry for sure. This is one of probably their second biggest game of the year. Georgia has to come out and prove, once again that South Carolina is beneath them, and not only from a talent perspective, but where they are normally in the SEC East. Can't lose to them twice in a row. It's going to be a tough environment to play in, as it usually is, but it is a big game and one that Kirby really has to win.
I think if South Carolina hadn't beaten Georgia in 2019, then Tennessee might have been the bigger game. But since they are going to have to go in and avenge that loss, that makes it way bigger of a deal. And if they have to go to South Carolina and do it, just makes it the 4th biggest game for Georgia this season.
One real quick thing about that Tennessee game. That game is in the late part of the season, so maybe, it's hard to pick the top 5. The biggest games are always conference games. That's why we put Carolina in over Georgia Tech. Number 3.
Auburn.
The Auburn Tigers. This is going to be a game in Athens. It's going to be earlier in the season, which is going to be really weird. Auburn and Georgia, we've always felt like, you can just depend it being very fall-like going into the winter. This game could be played in the 80s. It's going to be strange.
It's going to be really strange. Usually everyone's wearing jackets, and it's that time of the year. The game's sometimes at night, whether it's 3:30 or late. But no, it's the South's oldest rivalry. Again, we've talked about it before. This used to be kind of a brotherly rivalry. There's turned into a lot of hatred between the two. So it's going to be a war. It's going to be a fight. Auburn's going to have a good team. I don't know if they'll be good or as good defensively. Don't think they will, but the offense could be a little bit better than they were in 2019. So we'll see. Again, in Athens, Georgia's had their way with Auburn pretty recently. I think 3 in a row now, 6 out of 7, whatever it is. So definitely number 3 on the list for me.
And these two head coaches do not like each other, it seems.
No, absolutely not. You can tell with just the way Kirby acted after they beat him in 2019, and of course that was after that was the game he dropped the legendary "How about them
effing dogs?"
Yeah,
told him, "How about them dogs?" That's what I told him.
Yeah, that was an emotion. I think only one of the Georgia Auburn games lately has not been emotional, and that was in 2018 in Athens. But even then, Kirby went for a fake field goal up double digits or whatever.
The game was over.
With the game over. So these two guys, big rivalry, big game. Georgia and Auburn, number 3 on our list. Number 2, Dylan, is what does everyone think it would be? Number 2, Dylan?
the Florida Gators.
That means that the Gators have vacated their number 1 spot on the list, which is kind of a giant no-no for me. But Matt, I mean, it's still a huge game, the cocktail party in Jacksonville.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest rivalries in college football, has been for a long time. I still think Florida should be number one here, but I understand why number one is who it is. But the East is going to come down to Georgia, Florida once again. Florida's going to have a good team. They always have a pretty good defense. Kyle Trask coming back should be a year better. We'll see. Jake Fromm didn't really get better. But Dan Mullen is a good coach. Georgia will be the more talented team next year and in the foreseeable future. But this is Georgia's biggest rivalry. It's going to come down to the East again. And again, these two coaches don't like each other either.
That's a good point. Dylan, the Gators and Dawgs, we've been doing this since before the University of Florida was even a university. Just a big game. Always is.
I think, making it the second biggest game for them almost seems like a little harsh. It is like 1B, I think, in their season, because it always, year in and year out, is a crucial game for not only Georgia, but also just the SEC East in its entirety. And that won't be any different this year.
Well, the big thing for the Gators coming in this year is that they won't have to deal with Auburn, and Georgia will have to deal with Alabama and Auburn. So the Gators deal with just LSU and Ole Miss, who just made a coaching change. So the game is always huge. You've got to win it if you want to win the East. I mean, just almost never does the winner of this game, can you lose this game and survive and get to the East, to the championship game? It's Georgia's biggest game almost every year, but this year there's a new number one. Dylan, number one team, or the number one game of the season for Georgia next year.
Georgia at Alabama in Tuscaloosa.
The last time we were here, Nick Saban and the Tide fell victim to Matthew Stafford's overtime heroics. That was 13 years ago. That's what the TV money and TV gods have given us, is 13 years since Georgia has visited Alabama.
5 years before that, Georgia beat Alabama again in Bryant-Denny with the Billy Bennett game-winning field goal, the Fred Gibson catch at the goal line for the touchdown. Incredible game. Georgia's had some success in Bryant-Denny Stadium. One of those was against that early Nick Saban when he was at Alabama. So it's going to be rocking. There will be plenty of Georgia fans making the trip to Tuscaloosa. The environment's going to be crazy, and I'm assuming Alabama will be a top 5, 10 team, maybe top 10.
But not.
They might take a step backwards next year, but they're still going to be a really, really good team, and we'll see how good this Georgia team is when they get to Tuscaloosa.
In the case of both of these teams, Dylan, with Bama losing to Auburn to end the season, with Georgia losing to LSU in the championship game, this game is going to be the first, hey, are we right or not game for both of these programs. I mean, Bama plays USC to start the season. We're skeptical the Trojans will put it together and beat Bama. I'm skeptical Virginia will beat Georgia. But Georgia and Bama, the winner of this game, I don't know if you can make the claim that they'd be the number one team in the country, but they'd be certainly in the top 3.
Well, when you think about all the bad blood that's kind of been built since the last time they went to Tuscaloosa. They had the 2012 SEC championship game, and then
they had 2008 blackout where where Bama just drug Georgia's soul through the dirt.
Julio Jones destroying Brian Evans deep, and then the rain out in Athens, the monsoon. Georgia got whipped again by Bama, so they need to. I mean,
Georgia needs to win this game, but more than, not more than that, but fans have been robbed of this game. These two teams have only really met a few times in the regular season, once since 2008. They've met in a regular season game, but these games have been straight up classics. I mean, you start talking about 2002 Georgia Bama. Classic. 2003, Georgia blows Bama out. 2007, classic. 2008, Alabama blows Georgia out. 2012, classic.
But even the blowouts are memorable, and they have.
Well, I don't think the 2003 Georgia blowout of Alabama was very memorable. I mean, they just kicked the shit out.
Well, Thomas Davis, I think, broke Brody Croyle's ribs on a sack.
Right.
They lit him up really good in Athens that day.
But it's a huge game, Dylan. I mean, it's why we put it at number 1.
Yeah, regardless, and especially just with how it's gone down the past 2 times they've met.
Yeah. Last play of the game.
Yeah, on both. And so for Georgia fans and Georgia in general, they're just clamoring at the opportunity to avenge that.
Well, that's our list, the top 5. What did you think about it? Here's what I think. I think every single season is the game with the Gators. If Georgia goes down there and wins, they'll be in Atlanta again for the SEC championship game. If they don't, it's going to be tough to imagine them getting there. So Georgia and Florida in Jacksonville, the cocktail party, most important game of the season. Make sure to click to subscribe, and we'll see you over on the website.